Welcome to the Facebook listeners that are on.
Okay, we're on.
Are we ready,
Okay.
Leah?
James, we're on. We're on live
Okay.
and we're on Zoom.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And every day we rise is a great day to be alive. And welcome to the Seven Cities Forums of Hampton Roads presents Portsmouth Coffee Talks Morning Show. My name is James Lamoton, and I'm here with co-host Leah Drake Stitt and Thomas the Colonel Chapman. Good morning, co-host.
Good morning.
How are you? How are you? And Colonel, I see that star on your hat, and you know what that means.
Yes, we got another win. Got another win.
It's not only the win, but who it was against.
Yes.
Our favorite adversaries. But anyway, we got that win over the Washington Commodores. What's their name?
Oh, come on. Don't even try it.
But anyway,
We're not petty. We're not petty on this show. Come on. And since you all are doing all of that, I do have to say one thing, James. I want to wish my granddaughter, Leah Imani, a happy 22nd birthday on today. She's an advocate, Dr. Duncan, for mental health on the campus of North Carolina A&T. So happy birthday, Miss Leah Imani. Wishing you a lifetime of happiness and success.
Happy birthday.
yes, happy birthday, Leah. Namesake.
Namesake.
Anyway, and also like to call out Virginia Union. They won. They beat St. Aug 69-0. So anybody else in their path, watch out. And Narcombe lost one to Morey over the weekend, but we will come back.
We
Still
will
have
come
the
back.
Greyhound spirit.
That's
Anyway,
right.
the small talk, and we have our guest, and I'm gonna call her a guest host because she's a recurring guest, and she's been on coming on with me since my beginning, 5-6 years, and so I'm gonna have to call her a guest host because she's a frequent visitor of our program and resident expert. So it's Dr. Ernestine Duncan, and she is professor of psychology at Norfolk State University. And good morning, Professor. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, and I, with honor, accept the mantle of guest host. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, and thank you. And we have you on today. And this month starts off mental health month and domestic violence. So we want to start you off. Mental health and emotional issues that may have an effect on those involved in domestic violence. Is there a correlation there? I know it's a lot of other things involved, but what about the mental health and emotional effects that create those people that
Exactly. There is a relationship. We talk about mental health in general and how so many people are experiencing depression and anxiety. And clearly those things are interrelated with domestic violence, sometimes causing the cycle of domestic violence, but sometimes being the result of domestic violence. People are anxious, people are depressed. So we see a relationship in terms of causation, but also in terms of the results of how people are affected with domestic violence. And it's important for us to talk about the fact that when we refer to domestic violence, we sometimes talk about the perpetrator and the person who is the victim or the survivor, but we also have to understand that it impacts the whole home. So if there are children in that home or there's extended family, they are also impacted by what's happening with domestic violence.
It's interesting you talk about domestic violence, and that is universal, and it's not just in one race.
No.
And when we're talking about it, and it's an unsung problem across the country, and it affects all. And it doesn't make any difference of what economic or racial group you belong to. And so that's one point I just got to put out there. But while I'm out there, for those of y'all out there in electron lands, need to put the disclaimer out that the views stated on this program are of the host and the guests and no one else. So keep us out of Facebook jail. And in addition to, if you like what you're seeing, these kind of programs that you're listening to and seeing, you're only going to see it here. And then so for us to continue, we ask for your help to send donations to Portsmouth Coffee Talk, P.O. Box 7664, Portsmouth, Virginia 23707. And we need your help so we can continue these great programs. Thank you.
Dr. Duncan.
Yes.
Always great having you back
Thank
on
you.
Portsmouth Coffee Talk. I really enjoy speaking with you. And do we find that what percentage would you say of those involved in domestic violence has substance abuse? Or what does substance abuse play in that role of domestic violence?
Plays a significant role. And I did not look up statistics as it relates to domestic violence. We do know, however, that domestic violence and substance abuse, again, have correlations. There's a positive correlation between the two. The more you see substance abuse, the more likely you are to see domestic violence. I do want to piggyback back to what the Colonel said, though, in terms of how common and widespread domestic violence is when it comes to statistics. Globally, we know that about 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence. And although there are not any real disparities in terms of race, culture, there is disparity in terms of resources. And what you might expect is that women of color seem to have the least resources for being able to support themselves through and out of domestic violence. But to go back to the question of substance abuse, again, as a causation, there are many individuals who, under the influence of a substance, are more likely to impact violence against someone. But there is also the incidence of domestic violence and substance abuse on the other side, in that sometimes those who have been impacted are more likely to use substances as a way of coping. So you see that on the front end and you see it on the back end as well.
And also, Dr. Duncan, so often we talk about women who have been abused in domestic violence situations, but you have a lot of men who are in domestic violence situations as well. And you don't hear a lot about that situation.
The numbers say that it's similar, 1 in 3 men, but we can only imagine that all of these numbers are underreported, particularly for men, because for men, it is very difficult to admit to domestic violence, also referred to as intimate partner violence. So in all of the instances, domestic violence is also referred to intimate partner violence, but it is affected against men almost in the same numbers as women, but we consider that to be significantly underreported for men.
And are there avenues, like for men? I know with the ladies, they give them how you can have a code word that you can use, if you're in a domestic violence situation. Are there shelters that women can go to? What happens with the men?
Unfortunately, that's something that we do not see the same level of support for. Men who experience domestic violence, they have the same spaces as women to go, not necessarily the shelters, but the supports in terms of numbers they can call, mental health support, but it is just not as likely that they're going to seek them.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned on the men, though, there's a social stigma or taboo them coming out, even telling their own friends and family that they've been victims or alleged victims of domestic violence, and that's why the statistics were probably are not there, because men don't come out and say, hey, I'm a victim of such and such, and so they just hide and move back into the shadows.
Exactly. And again, and you see then that relationship with mental health issues, they become anxious, they become depressed, they may resort to substance use as a means of coping. But for men, they are more likely to go untreated because they, as you say, they don't seek the help and the support because there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of shame for them associated with being in a situation such as that, and not defending themselves.
Dr. Duncan, I don't know if you all covered this in your studies when you are looking at domestic violence and mental health, but the Colonel always talks about our two justice systems that we deal with here. And a lot of times domestic violence ends up in murder or people really getting hurt. Do you see, is it equal justice as far as getting the perpetrators of domestic violence, or the victims that may be Black compared to another race?
So here's another disparity that does exist in terms of race. 50% of Black women who are homicide victims are victims of domestic abuse. So we're saying that of the Black women, right, who are murdered, half of them are murdered and have a history of domestic abuse. So there is a relationship there. There is a relationship there with race, ethnicity, and domestic violence. But we find that there is conflicting information about what happens to the perpetrators. There is evidence in the judicial system that men of color in particularly get more sentences and get heavier sentences. But there is also evidence, conflicting evidence that says sometimes these men are not brought to justice for a myriad of reasons, giving some the feeling that the lives of Black women are not valued. So men who commit these crimes are not always punished. It starts with sometimes women not pressing the charges, right? But then secondly, when men are apprehended, they are sometimes allowed to not be held accountable, and people have attributed that to a less of a value to Black women's lives.
And then also you have that socioeconomic status there where depends on if the perpetrators can afford the best lawyers, and they'll make that woman, the victim, look like, look like she asked for it or whatever, to get that person off. So you have that to deal with as well.
And go ahead, Dr. Duncan.
I was just gonna say, and it's so interesting when you say that, because those are exactly the words that are used. She asked for it. And if you really think about that in the context of what it means, they are suggesting then that people, women, can actually do something that would warrant someone hitting them. And that makes absolutely no sense. None.
And Dr. Duncan, so often when we think about abuse, we think about the physical abuse. However, the mental abuse is much worse than the physical abuse. So can you talk about that mental abuse? And women tend to want to dismiss it, or that's how he is. But when you're constantly being bombarded mentally, eventually it has a major impact upon you. So could you say something about that mental abuse as well?
That is exactly right. There are multiple forms of abuse, and we do tend to just talk about the physical abuse, but the mental abuse comes as a result of individuals who may exert control over the other person. They may withhold. Even just talking to people, if you really consider what it might be like to live in the context of living with someone who refuses to speak to you, right? Who doesn't answer your questions, or who is intentionally mean towards you, who withholds things from you, to include your basic needs, may not have provisions for you. There's financial abuse as well. When individuals in a relationship withhold what's necessary financially for the house to be run. So you're right. And the impact of that takes us again to the mental health piece. When women, men experience domestic abuse that is emotional, they end up being very depressed. They end up being very anxious. There's a relationship between that and suicidal ideation, suicidal behavior. And some say that the emotional abuse is worse than the physical abuse, because they feel like once there's a hit, once there's an incident, there's a cycle of abuse, which includes the incident. They feel like once that happens, then it's over. But with the emotional abuse, you kind of ponder on it, you think on it, you ruminate on it, and it causes more long-term distress.
Yeah, and how do you prove that?
Exactly. How do you prove it? People will say they're being too sensitive. Just like they said they called for the physical abuse. They can say, you're just being too sensitive. You need to get over it. It's not such a big deal. But it really matters what the individual is experiencing and their ability to be able to communicate that, and then to make some decisions about what they will or what they will not accept in their relationship. But especially when you talk about socioeconomic status, there are many individuals who stay in relationships with violence because that is their financial support.
Yeah.
But
And
you know
Dr.
what?
Duncan, also, there are some signs that will let you know in which direction you're headed. If you're with someone who wants to cut you off from all your family members and friends, and what other signs would you look for in these individuals? Because they do display them early. And sometimes we just want to ignore the signs that they bring to the table.
So we talk about the fact that domestic violence doesn't happen overnight. Generally, there's a long history, and sometimes we misinterpret or we ignore the signs.
Exactly.
In the beginning of a relationship, we call it that honeymoon period, and we just want to be around each other all the time, and we want people to ourselves. But sometimes that can come out to be a little bit too controlling. And as you say, we see it with relationships where one partner wants to exclude the person from the other aspects of their life. So they don't want them to be around family. They don't want them to be around friends. And we sometimes misinterpret that or ignore that to be, oh, they're just crazy about me. Oh, they just really love my company. But in reality, it turns out to be control.
Exactly.
We also see where sometimes individuals are physical or they're angry, but we feel that that jealousy is attractive. Oh, he doesn't want anybody else looking at me. Oh, he just loves me so much. But at a certain point, you have to then understand that as the person having control issues or having anger issues, that they're not going to resolve well without you making some demands or leaving.
And then you have that situation, James. I promise my last one. I promise you. And then you have those situations where a spouse would tell you, if you try to leave me, I'm gonna kill you, or I'm gonna bring harm to you. And you need to really
Mhm.
listen to what they're saying and get out of that situation. What can you say about that?
This is why the treatment, the intervention for domestic violence is so precarious, because many times the suggestions that we have for individuals who are in domestic violence situations, it could actually get them killed.
Mhm, mhm,
And so that is why, for example, there's the Her Shelter
mhm,
in Portsmouth.
mhm,
Location, we don't know where it is.
mhm.
And so, and there are also, you may have seen recently, especially as we're going into domestic violence month, that there are certain code words
Mhm.
and things that you can say when you are on the phone with the police. For example, I've seen one where you can call the police and act as though you're ordering a pizza.
Mm,
And you can give answers in case anyone is listening
mhm,
that don't alert the listener that you're actually talking to the police.
mhm,
I went on a website yesterday in preparation for today, looking at some statistics and some resources for domestic violence. And there's a red box that says, if you need to leave this site immediately, click this button.
mm,
And it would erase the history
mm.
that the person was on that site. So we try to put in controls for people to get help that don't disclose they're getting help, because simply getting help and letting other people know can further jeopardize the person that is in danger.
Mm.
Well, Dr. Duncan, I saw that as well when I was looking up research, and I thought that was great because a lot of the perpetrators follow what you do on the internet,
That's right.
and they
That's right.
use that against you, who you're talking to and all that. I just wanted to ask this about, a lot of times when you ask someone why you stay there and they say, well, I love him. And it might be more of a emotional dependence. And I think it's a difference there because love doesn't allow you to let people abuse you like that. But
Exactly.
emotional dependence may. And you mentioned that earlier, financial dependence and things like that. You have nowhere else to go. And how do you get across to some of the victims, the difference between emotional dependence and what they might perceive as love?
One of the things that, again, is correlated with individuals who stay in domestic violence is self-esteem and self-image. Sometimes people will stay in situations because they believe that that is what they deserve. In other words, they don't feel a sense of urgency to protect themselves. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's the people look at the statistics as especially in our community, that there aren't any good men out there. So I'm in this relationship, I might as well stay. You're going to deal with something. And so I'm going to stay. One of the things we try to do is to get individuals to just see their self-worth, to improve their self-image, and to feel better and have better self-esteem. Once you feel better about yourself, you will not allow certain things to
Exactly.
continue for you.
Exactly.
So we work a lot with women, and I would say that the same thing would exist for men. I've not worked with men, but we work with women to try to get them to improve their self-esteem. And once they improve their self-esteem, some things can become non-negotiable.
And
But
the sad thing. Okay, go ahead, Kern. I'm sorry.
Well, you know what? You mentioned the statement of self-esteem or socioeconomic status, but America has been changing over the last few decades, and I say that because one, the changing roles of the male and the female within the household and out here in society has changed, and then the traditional breadwinner has changed. It used to be back in the day, the male was the primary breadwinner, and Miss Cleveland stayed home and raised the kids. Now, fast forward 40 years, the female or the woman is the primary breadwoman, and you may find the spouse has less education and is raising the kids, or is just sitting at home, just is on the other side of the economic status, is not making as much as her, which can create stigma. And we don't teach that in schools anymore, in the grade school, high schools, that yes, women, you got to get yours and you can be the doctors and da 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 da. But look at that when you choose your spouse. Can they handle that change? And we don't do that as parents also. And actually, when you look at history, and I look at one of the statements, like when Hillary Clinton was first lady, and she made the statement, what do you want me to do? Stay home and bake cookies. And the GOP stood up and wanted to crucify her right then, because how dare she step out of the first lady's role of baking cookies at the White House and say something like that. And that was blasphemy. And so that was a comment. So what say you, Ernestine?
Clearly, gender roles have changed, and expectations about what is appropriate and the norm for men and women to do in the household. Those things have definitely changed over the years, and we see the results of that. Again, it's very conflictual, because there are some women who are high achieving, and in their relationships then are expected to have the bake the cookie role. And sometimes their partners will. And I also am reminded that I want to say the highest incidence right now of intimate partner violence is actually women who are in homosexual relationships. So we see more violence for women that are in relationships, same-sex relationships. But it is sometimes because of those dynamics where one person does bring more to the table or does provide the household more, that the other partner is threatened by that, and then will impact violence against that individual. And so that is the conflictual nature of intimate partner violence. We don't always see the one who has all of the power executing the violence. Sometimes because of, again, issues around what should happen according to gender role and expectations. And we don't have those conversations, which is why I'm always so happy to be here and to be in places where there is the opportunity to have the conversation, because perhaps someone watching will then have the conversation outside of this hour to introduce these subjects that have typically been taboo and have stigma associated with them, but begin the conversation. So you're exactly right. It is something that we don't talk to our children about. It's not talked about in schools, but neither are the issues related to making a budget. And so they are all lifetime issues, but we need to have more conversations.
Dr. Duncan, are there statistics that show the impact upon children where girls will grow up and think, hey, this is the way it's supposed to be, Or
just wanted to make the change real quick, and you can come right back.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to thank all the listeners on WGPL 1350 for watching today. And we appreciate you, and we want you to watch and support Black media and our show as well. We're part of the Black media. You get some of the news and the information that you won't get anywhere else, or to an extent that we share it. So we want to thank you.
That 30 minutes went too fast for me. It went too fast. But Dr. Duncan, I'm just wondering, are there stats out there? Because you see girls who've been children of women who've been abused, and they in turn go into abusive relationships. And you see young men who have seen their fathers abusing and they too become abusers. So are there any statistics on the impact it has upon the children within the family?
Yes, there's an increased likelihood that children who grow up in homes where there's domestic violence will form relationships where there is domestic violence. And those numbers are somewhere around 40%. So almost half of children who grow up in homes where there's domestic violence will also go on to have their own homes where there is domestic violence. Both sons and daughters are influenced by what they see as they're growing up.
Dr. Duncan, you mentioned earlier about the underreported cases of domestic violence. And you also talked right before we made the transition about same-sex women or partners together. And I just wanted to know, is it considered like a woman hitting another woman less than a man hitting a woman? And that's why you don't get as reported as much, or if it is reported, it's not taken as seriously as it would be if a man hit a woman.
What I can say in regards to that is that there is a lot of research in the area of same-sex intimate partner violence. How that then correlates to what we see in a community is confounded by the homosexuality. Again, people don't always want to identify as being in a homosexual relationship. Many times when intimate partner violence occurs between women in particular, they don't want to report it because there may be the attitude, that's what you get, that's what you deserve, you're in that relationship anyway. And so we do see further underreporting as it relates to the judicial system and then what happens with that. But yes, many times because we think of it as women against women, we don't think about it as being as harmful as when a man hits a woman.
Exactly.
It's perceived very differently.
Women and women, they'll call it the cat fight. And then a man hits a woman, he's beating her up.
Exactly. Exactly.
So in males who are in same-sex relationships, you don't have many incidents?
We don't
or
have
that is not reported, or what's taking place?
We can only imagine that it is not reported. Because the numbers, as you look for men who are being assaulted by their intimate partner, they are extremely low. And we can only imagine that that's because people are not coming forward.
Gary Harris writes, great topic, dialogue, and conversation. It's about power. We have several initiatives to advance women's equality. SDG number 9, women's equality, example, inspire, and empower. Advancing women's equality reduces cases of domestic violence. What say you, Dr. Duncan?
I would have to agree. But it's not just the women's equality that we see culturally. It's what happens in the home. And if that equality is not established between the partners, then that's where you see more incidents of control and you see more incidents of abuse. There is a cycle for domestic violence, and it starts with a tension. And once there's the tension, many times if there's a history of intimate partner violence, the person who's being abused becomes keenly aware. They come in the house, they're angry, they're not talking. That's the phase of the cycle that has to do with the tension. And it just kind of builds up, and you'll see the partner trying to do everything they can to make the situation go away or to lessen the tension. So they may be quiet. They may take the kids to their mom's house so the kids don't have to be there or exacerbate what's going on with the tension. And then once the tension meets a certain point, then there's the incident. And the person will be abused. It will happen. The third phase, and there are 4 phases. The third phase is the reconciliation. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. And they will reconcile.
Mhm,
And then there's a period of calm.
mhm,
But that 4-phase cycle, it repeats itself.
mhm, mhm.
And that is how the domestic violence continues across the course of a relationship.
Patsy Calvinus Hines writes, during the 70s, when I was married, there were no safety nets, no services. It is so gradual from I'm so sorry, I really love you, escalates to total abuse. Felt so embarrassed, silent suffering. So a whole lot of ladies out there who are suffering in silence and not sharing with anyone what's taking place in their lives.
I think then when we begin to talk about that, we have to understand that sometimes the safest place for people to share what's going on with them is going to be with us.
Mhm,
They're not going to call a hotline.
mm-mm,
They're not going to go to a shelter. And so positioning ourselves that we would be able to give meaningful commentary about what's told to us. So I would say here, what would you say to someone who came and told you, I'm in a domestic violence situation?
mhm.
How would we respond? What might we offer with the understanding that that individual should take the lead, because anything that we say or any action that we
Yes,
offer them could put them in further danger?
exactly.
Our inclination might be to say, come stay with me,
Mhm,
or you have to get out of there. But that alone could put the individual in greater risk. And what would we say if we offer them an out and they choose not to take it?
mhm.
To still make ourselves available to hear them and to communicate with them, but to do so in a way that allows them to take the lead. Be respectful. Just because someone is in a domestic violence situation, their rights and their respect could be further violated by
Mhm.
people telling them what they have to do.
Mm.
Mhm.
So we should be listeners.
Yes. But you know what? I will go even further. When you look at the issue of control of women, when you and Slim mentioned the judicial system and control of women, when you move it into the policy, the state and national policy arena, when you look at when you have the GOP or the Confederates refuse to reauthorize the Women's Equality Act, then you go back and look at the Jobs decision when they took away the right for for abortions. That's over control of your body, women's bodies in all of the Confederate states that are taking that right away. And then so you're getting less and less rights for women. You go back even past that, the next thing will be you look at the Supreme Court overturning Griswold versus Connecticut for the right for contraception. So I'm taking more rights away. Clarence Thomas has already said he wants to look at all of these rights that are spelled out in the Constitution. But you know what? There's a connection between that, the rights against women and how they, and especially women of color. And so it is coming. So say I look at the policy and we're getting ready to have another election. And if you want to continue down this path where you have no women, you have no rights, less and less rights, stay home or either vote for GOP if you decide to go backwards. If you want to continue forward where you have a right to even get your own birth control, just had to have the pill. even that's going to be at stake if you stay home or you vote GOP. So that's just another commentary there.
Well, I understand that position. You know, I think a lot of times my inclination has been when you talk about civil rights, we always talk about it or the focus is on race or on us as Black individuals, but civil rights also at one time pertained to women. Women didn't have a right to vote.
That's right.
Women didn't have rights. And so we see ourselves coming full circle back to that time. And I would just have to add to that, Colonel, what James said, and that is, and this is particularly key when we look at socioeconomic status, because the rights of women that are being taken or that are being changed are affecting women with means far less than women who are dependent upon governmental assistance. So socioeconomically, this also exacerbates the problem for women. Yes, there does seem to look as though we're going backwards and the rights of women are being compromised, but that could never be more true for women who are low in socioeconomic status, not just the money we make, but also the education. That socioeconomic status also relates to our educational level, the places where we live. And so those things are really affecting women, women of color, women without means, women without education. And you're right, voting can help that.
And James, you brought a fact to a point earlier when we were talking before Dr. Duncan came on. You mentioned, I think, with 4 states where the abuse level is extremely high. Do you remember?
Yeah,
one was Kentucky.
It was Kentucky, the top 3, Oklahoma and Ohio,
Iowa. Okay.
Yes, and it was strange. I was wondering what's going on in those states. But before you get to that, I wanted to take our direction to the identification and the treatment of the abusers. But before we go there, you know, I think all of us here are in a generation that we can remember if we did something wrong, our parents would spank us or we'd get a whooping and things like that. But as we go forward like that, that was accepted. You know, we came out all right. But we also, when you talk about domestic abuse, you have to include the children that are being victims of this type of abuse as well. So how do you sort of make the distinction between that? And a lot of parents are not doing that, not doing the discipline things that our parents did to us, but some of them still are. But so how do you distinguish the difference between that done with love, like our parents said, and real abuse
with the broom handle with love.
Yeah. The shoe that came from across the room. But I mean, I jest about that, but seriously, the real abuse of children that might be going on in the household that's not reported, and if so, what are there for the children? I mean, how do you step in? I mean, social services. I mean, because a lot of times the children are not believed. If the parents don't back them up, one parent doesn't back up the other one for abusing the children.
Really controversial, very controversial, because there are many parents who feel you have no right to tell me how to discipline my children, how to discipline my child. And they use corporal punishment, some very effectively, but some who are they are abusive. And so the controls have been put in place that children can go talk to a teacher, or a teacher may observe something that makes them suspicious that abuse is happening. A lot of times we see it in children's behavior because children don't have the vocabulary really to be able to communicate what it is they're feeling, the fear they're experiencing, but you will see it in their behavior. They may be extremely shy. They may be extremely angry. They may show it with sadness. And so that sometimes triggers a teacher or a counselor in the school to ask questions. But sometimes we don't know. And it may be just that auntie or that uncle that they come to, and then we have to be prepared again. I think that the weight falls very heavily on our shoulder to position ourselves so that we're available to hear when our children have something to say. The question then is, then what do you do? Right? Because again, just as an intimate partner violence, we may be putting these children at risk. So that is why this is so controversial, and each situation should be tailored specifically for that individual. You know that there are some people that you could sit down with and say, hey, listen, I'm concerned. Billy told me that blah, blah, blah. And you can have an honest conversation. There are other individuals, you better not say that about what their child, that what is, we say, what goes on in this house stays in this house. And so that the child took some information from the house will be putting that child at further risk. So there is no one size fits all answer for any of these situations. The best thing that we can do is to listen, to try to provide support for the person that's in the situation. We have a little bit more responsibility. There are individuals who are mandated reporters when it comes to children. So the right of not saying anything is no longer there. Something must be said, but that's not the case for adults. So again, just positioning ourselves in a place where we can objectively and without judgment listen to what's being told and to us and support the individual through the process.
You know, amazingly enough, when I was doing some long-term sub work and a student came to the class and had bruises on the kid and obligated to share with the principal and with the counselor that this child had the bruises on this child had bruises on it. And knew the mother, which put me in a very awkward situation.
Yes.
Because I had to report it. Mother became very angry with me because I reported it, but you're obligated to do that when you were in the educational setting.
Yes, you
And you know, and it really kind of I guess puts the educator, and especially if they know the parent, between a rock and a hard place, but you know that you're obligated to share this information about the bruises that are on the child, you know. And I mean, it turned up to be unfounded, but they still had to go through the whole process because the child was bruised, you know.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it just kind of puts you in a you have to do it. You have to do it. That's all. So
you have to do it. You know, I now not so much today, but I remember when I was very vigilant, hyper vigilant about these kinds of things. And I would say to my family, don't tell me no stuff you don't want me to tell it, because I'm telling it. I'm telling it. And so when you are mandated, you are mandated.
Yeah.
So it's important that people know that, because it becomes your obligation to report.
You know, and I've had too many friends whose husbands telling them how much they love them and what they would do. And I mean, and ended up in death, you know, they ended up dead because
their husbands loved them so
they
much.
loved them so much, you know. And that kind of love, you don't need that kind of love. I'm sorry, you know. But too many people I've known who've died as a result of that so-called love that was shining on them. The husbands would give them presents, do all kinds of wonderful things for them, you know, always celebrating them, but yet and still they were abusing them, you know, and they wouldn't get out of the situation. And like you say, you couldn't tell them that they needed to leave, you know, because they just dismissed it, you know. Well, this is how he is, you know, he really loves me, but you know, sometimes he gets a little upset with me, you know,
Mhm.
and
Or
it's
or
just
working
frightening, you
hard.
know. And I tell
Mhm.
my granddaughter, any guy tell you he loved you so much that if you leave him, he's gonna take your life, believe him. He will
Mhm.
take your life. He will
Mhm.
take your life.
Mhm.
Believe it.
Mhm.
Oh, just
Yeah.
kind of got me here for a moment here, Dr. Duncan.
Well, it's a very serious subject. It's a very emotional subject because sometimes we watch people create their own demise,
Exactly.
and we stand by literally helpless
Hmm.
because we can't go get them. And if we did go get them, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to leave the situation. And
Exactly.
so our hands can be tied. And that's why this is such a difficult topic. I am a member of Grove, and we're trying to bring awareness to this. On October 15th, that we're having a fashion show. And it's to bring awareness to domestic violence. So if for anyone who might be interested in that, if they would just follow up at Grove Church, you will find out October 15th, there will be a fashion show that's a fundraiser, but it will bring awareness to domestic violence. There's a very powerful silent witness, this exhibit that they have, where they have the cutouts of individuals, men, women, children, that are real stories of individuals who've been impacted by domestic violence. It's just a very powerful awareness. It's why I appreciate you for having this as a topic of discussion, because we just need to bring awareness. Bringing awareness is the first step toward affecting some change.
Mhm. But you know what? You talk about change, and I think Slim was talking about those 4 states, and I'll highlight Kentucky, and it has one of the higher percentages of lower economic or people that have been struggling in the country. But those 4 states that Slim mentioned or Leah mentioned are all led by Republican governors, state houses. And so you put things in policy to exacerbate these problems. So if I'm abused and I go down there and I call, the local sheriff or whoever the police department is, and Officer Billy Bob shows up, who is the whole police department is friends with, and they don't take it serious. Well, that's Sally Mae, and it's not really a problem because such and such is a good man. He goes to church. And then, so where do you go from there when the system that is supposed to be there to protect you is actually against you? And so that's another problem that we have across this country, especially in the Confederate States.
It is a problem. And again, keeping the distinction between reporting and then what's done, right? Because you're saying these are the states with the highest numbers, right? So people are reporting it.
Yeah.
But what's being done about it?
But as you say, if there's policies in place or if there are not policies in place, then what happens? So that could only make me think that even though the numbers are high, how much higher would they be if people felt like they were going to get justice?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why this is so controversial.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's interesting, Colonel. The correlation between those states and being red, and probably those states are supporting the Supreme Court's last decision about
Yes.
abortion. So it's funny how that all ties in together. But anyway, Dr. Duncan,
All about control.
yeah, Dr. Duncan, the treatment of the identification and the treatment of the abusers, uh, it, it, is it work towards that? I mean, you don't know until they are abusers, I guess, but I guess there may be some signs, the telltale signs that you can miss. Like you said, you always have that honeymoon period, so you don't know who might turn into an abuser in the beginning, not unless he has a history that people know about. So, what about the treatment of those abusers? Sometimes it has to be voluntary. Sometimes you have to report it to the point, and there is action taken against that person. Because sometimes jail time it might be temporary and they come right back out.
Right.
The
Those
same
things
attitude. What about
that lead a person to be abusive are never resolved in jail.
Mm-mm.
And so we talk about individual therapy, we talk about couples therapy or family therapy, and also group therapy can be effective for individuals who are perpetrators. And all of those have been found to be reasonably effective. But it is, again, such an issue that is complex. People don't abuse simply because they have short fuses, but they live in conditions that leave them very frustrated. You know, a lot of times men report abusing because they have all of these stressors that are impacting them. They don't like their job. They're not making enough money to support the family. So it's not just a psychological issue that they have anger, for example. They may have anger, but it's exacerbated by the fact that they're in a job they don't like. A lot of women have tolerated or made excuses for abuse because of how their man is treated in the world. He's so frustrated when he comes home. I understand that. So it is just this perfect storm of circumstances that need to be addressed in the therapeutic process. Jail and incarceration do not address those things, but individual therapy, therapy with the partner, therapy in the home, and group therapy so that perpetrators can see other perpetrators, some who are at varying stages of healing, to know that they can be healed as well.
But how do you get them to attend these?
Jail probably will turn them into one of the inmates' partners because they typically do not abuse people that are their equal. You know, they go after people physically or emotionally. And because, you know, they just, when the man walks in or someone that's their equal or larger, they will not, you know, how big and bad they were against that person that was lesser than them, they turn into little wimps.
But Dr. Duncan, how do you get them to attend these sessions? You know, how do you can't mandate them to go, you know, so I mean, how do you move them from the place where they are as the abuser to wanting to be a part of group therapy or individual therapy or any therapy? Because maybe in their mind's eye, they don't see themselves as an abuser.
Often they don't. And that question is the $1 million question. We already know, because we've talked here many times about the stigma with mental health, and this is considered going to therapy. I don't need to go. I'm not going. And especially for men, that is even more challenging. So the answer to that, we don't have it yet. You try to make it as attractive as possible. You try to provide incentives where you can. But again, you want people to come of their own volition. And often we don't see that. Sometimes if the partner threatens to go, this is the only way that I will accept you back. This is the only way that you could come back home. But again, because of the complicated nature of domestic violence, you don't always get women who are willing to let their man be out of the house. He has to do these things before he can come back. And so there are no absolutes, there are no requirements, and therefore they don't.
And Dr. Duncan, another point is that a lot of people says, well, I'm going to talk to my minister. Well, I don't diminish the minister in his role, but if you have a mental health crisis, you need to go to a mental health expert, not a minister. I mean, he can talk to you about the religious aspects of situations, but if he's not a mental health certified counselor, he can't help you with those mental health issues.
The reality is, for a very long time, pastors held and still do hold a very revered place in our communities. And people see them as an advocate They see them as a counselor, and that doesn't negate the fact that they are. But as you say, sometimes more help is needed, more expertise is needed when it comes to mental health. So I am always grateful for those pastors who
I was about to
will
say.
then direct people, because, you know, I've heard lately, you can have Jesus and a therapist too.
Right.
And so the two are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes it is just getting the pastors to embrace therapy as an option, and then directing them to where they can get more specific help.
Right.
Pray and then get help.
Pray and then get help.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, you know, that half hour is shot by.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness
Again.
gracious.
Again.
We're winding
Again.
down. That's why we repeatedly have Dr. Duncan on, because the information she shares is just so compelling and informative, for one thing. And we now calling her a guest host. So she's a part of Portsmouth Coffee Talk. So she'll be back time and time again.
And you know, James, and it's really kind of got chills in my body, because I'm thinking about friends who I know who are in these situations, and
right now,
I'm just praying that they're listening. I will share with them. I will tell them to go online if they're not looking today, to go online and really watch this program. And as you say, we can't guide them. We can't tell them what to do. However, prayerfully, they will watch this and they will find out what they need to do in order to protect themselves and their children. So,
Dr. Duncan, mention again the program that Grove is having on the
October 15th, which is a Saturday, a fashion show with a purpose. At 5 o'clock, we will be at Grove Church. The proceeds, the tickets are just $10. The proceeds will be used to support the Hair Shelter here in Portsmouth. We will have the guest speaker, who is the executive director of the Y, Michelle Ellis Young. And so we're asking women to come out and to, we're gonna have an hour of heavy hors d'oeuvres, and then we will move to the fashion show. And the women are working real hard to be able to present something that we think will be enjoyable, but at the same time, serious, and bring attention to a very, very, very serious issue in our community.
and Miss Young is, you're going to enjoy Miss Young. If you want, I'm telling you, she's a powerful speaker. So
yeah, we're looking forward to it. We are looking forward to it. But I can't leave without saying to you again, thank you so much for being willing to address the difficult issues. As we see here, there is no one answer. There is no right answer, and lives are at stake.
Yes.
And so the best we can do is to not turn our eye away from this, but to give it some attention. And I appreciate the Portsmouth Coffee Talk for being willing to do that.
Thank you. And Dr. Duncan, how do you purchase the tickets? You go on online, or?
They are purchased online at PushPay. That's why I would direct people to Grove Church, and they can direct you on how to purchase a ticket or to donate, again, as this is a fundraiser.
Yeah, please donate it, even if you can't make it, because the money is going towards a good cause. So thanks again. We appreciate you. And we'll see you next time. We have a very difficult, and maybe we're going to bring you back sometime when we have some fun topics to talk about. Because,
that would be great. That would be great.
The world is not all, what we need to talk about. So we'll come back and talk about some fun topics with you involving what you do.
I would love that. In fact, if I could do what they call a shameless plug.
Yeah.
At Norfolk State, which is closed today, I'm doing a stress management series. And so this semester, we're talking about all of the things that we can do to manage our stress. Little everyday things like planning your meals or making a to-do list. So while that may not be fun, it is a good way. It's not focusing on the heaviness of what happens with mental health. It's looking at the ways that we can improve our mental health and do it on an everyday basis. So I would love to come and talk about that or any other topic that you felt like would be relevant for me to discuss.
Yeah, and if you make a list, don't stress out if you don't complete it. Carry it over.
That's exactly right. That is the first thing we start with. Be flexible.
Yeah.
Be flexible. If you don't get all 35 things done that day, it's okay.
Yeah, just make sure you get 34.
Dr. Duncan, Eric Perman says that you are phenomenal. So
that is my neighbor. And I thank him.
He's giving you a lot of accolades here. So yes, indeed.
Okay. Well, hi, Eric.
Well, thanks everybody, and thanks to all the people on Facebook for watching, and be sure to share this show, or tell people if they missed it, they can go on and watch it on our YouTube channel later on. And if you go there, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. We appreciate you. Portsmouth Coffee Talk is here.
Maybe, James, before you go, mention our show. We have a special edition this evening. Please mention that.
Well, you go ahead and mention it since.
This evening, we will at 7 o'clock this evening, we're going to have a special show. We're going to have John Carlos, who is the 1968 Olympian who held his fists up at the Olympics Games and also took his shoes off. And he's going to talk about humanity. He's having a walk for humanity at IC Norcom High School on this Saturday. So Dr. Carlos and some of the individuals involved in putting this event together will be on this evening at 7 o'clock. And Dr. Duncan, you know Malaria. Malaria is one of the individuals, because she speaks very highly of you. But Malaria Green is one of the individuals, but they will be on this evening at 5 o'clock. And I surely would like to talk to him. I tell you, I look at the pictures and I've seen it, and it's just would be such an honor to talk to the 1968 Olympian who has been fighting for humanity since 1968, and he continues to fight for humanity. So please join us this evening at 7 o'clock on Portsmouth Coffee Talk.
Okay, I'm glad you corrected that. You said 5.
Did I say 5?
At
7 o'clock, 7 o'clock.
And all you all remember that famous picture of the Olympics in 1968 with the guys holding their hands up, the Black Power sign. And it's sort of like what the modern day cabinet kneeling during during the national anthem. Same kind of protest, a silent protest, but it was very powerful. It was very powerful. So we are pleased and lucky to have him on tonight.
I'm excited.
I am too. I am
just as excited as I am about you, Dr. Duncan.
It's okay. It's okay. He's an Olympian.
And someone
but you're saving lives. Hey, remember that, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Portsmouth Coffee Talk is here for our voice,
our community,
in our future.
Dr. Duncan, you're gonna have to have a cup the next time, because you have to hold. We're gonna make sure you have a cup so you can hold your cup up, okay?
I'm making arrangements for that as soon as I click leave.
Yeah, but we're gonna give you a Portsmouth Coffee Talk cup to hold up, okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
As a host, you have to have a cup.
You have to have a cup.
Well, thank you so much. I would love it.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.
See you all at 7 o'clock this evening.
Yes, definitely.
Looking forward to it.
Tell your neighbors.
Well, now it's